So, hello and welcome to Young Ladies Club Sheroes mentoring program. Just for housekeeping, so your name is Dr. Joanna, is it Abeyie?
Yeah,
Okay.
you got that right.
So, thank you so much for joining this program. I'm joined by our project officer, Alessia, who will be managing the Zoom meeting today. Hello, Alessia.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Alessia.
So we just want to ask you a few questions so that those that have joined can sort of find out a bit about your journey and what inspired you to start up your business and more about your career journey as well. So you run an organization called Blue Moon. What inspired you to set up your business?
So I set up my business when I launched my first charity with my friends when I was 18 called Elevation Networks Charitable Trust. And that went on for 2 years with us all as about like a 7. And the whole point of that organisation really was to introduce, it was a youth employment charity really, and we had the slogan "Know Who, Know How." So the point was to introduce our people that were in sort of underrepresented universities at that time to organisations like within the professional services. So that was financial services or law firms. And it wasn't because we had a preference over young people that had a degree. It was because we were really trying to challenge some of those organisations to think about the amount of people that they missed out on who weren't at their kind of Oxbridge universities. And that was at a time, so we're talking about 2005, 6, 7. So that was at a time when a lot of the early careers and entry-level programs were really focused around graduates. And so trying to convince organisations to look beyond graduates was quite a big ask at that time. Not that we didn't agree, but it just was. So what we tried to do to start getting them on that path of actually thinking about a broader pool of talent was to introduce them to universities that weren't your top 20, you know, where there were really diverse pools of students who weren't necessarily getting access to great opportunities. So that still exists. They've gone on to do some really great stuff at Elevation Networks. But probably about 2 years after being there, at the same time as doing that, I was of course doing my degree, but I was also doing work experience as a journalist. So following lots of work experience, I knew there was a bigger problem that I was probably going to be more familiar with, which was in, I wouldn't say bigger problem, let me rephrase that, an equally significant problem within the creative industries, where literally those from like low socioeconomic backgrounds and those with from ethnic minority backgrounds and those with disabilities just were non-existent. And if you were from a low socioeconomic background, I mean, you were really kind of, you were doing things like I was doing, like forfeiting lunch, walking to work experience. Like it's a big strain on someone from that background. So that was when it all kind of started really. I continued to be a journalist for 10 years, but at the same time I set up my own organisation, which at the time was Shine Media. And what we did with Shine Media was to focus purely on bringing diverse talent into the creative industry. So specifically journalism, television, and then I went on to advertising. So it really started then. I mean, since then we've renamed and we don't focus just on the creative industries. We focus on professional services, law firms, like the Magic Circle law firms, construction, engineering, the education sector, automotive, retail. So we've broadened out over the last sort of 14 years, but to begin with, that's why it started, that I started to see from my own experiences how difficult it was going to be for other people like me to get into the creative industries really. So that's why it started.
So it's obvious that you had sort of a passion for the creative industry. And what age did you start up was it Shine Media?
Yeah, I was 20, so I was in my second year of uni, where I was doing English and sociology at Reading. And I was doing lots of work experience. So what I basically created through Shine Media was mentoring programs, work experience programs with mainstream organisations. So it was a place like Hearst magazines, who obviously published things like Cosmo and Harper's Bazaar and Bauer Media, which are like the publishers for like Grazia, Grazia, Heat, and Closer. And so I worked in that space to begin with. And then we moved into the broadcasters, so the Channel 4s, BBCs, ITVs. And at that point, we started to create training programs that were specifically giving people from a broader range of backgrounds the specific skills and training that they needed in order to be able to compete for jobs in the broadcasting industry. So that was essentially what we did. But I balanced that with like, so I worked for a number of magazines over the 10 years. And so I would like literally for between the age of 22 when I graduated to pretty much 2015, I would work all day, whether I was at Closer or Cosmo or The Sun or The Mail or whatever. And then I would go off to all the events in the evening, red carpet events, launch parties, film premieres, all of that, do all the interviews. About 11, 12, everyone else would sort of maybe go on to after parties or go home. I would then take a night bus to my office, which was like a kind of rented desk out of a warehouse in Camden that was specifically set up for young entrepreneurs. And then I'd work there till like 4 a.m. on the Shine Media and running, like organising all the teachers for the next session and getting all that sort of stuff done. So it was kind of like, it was a bit ridiculous, to be honest. Like it was completely around the clock. And that kind of went on until about 2015, 16. And then I decided to focus purely on just running the business. And I'd make a few documentaries where I could. And so that's what I did. And since then, it's just grown.
That was a side hustle, essentially, then.
It started off as like it wasn't even so with a hustle, I would imagine that, like, I assume that means you earn money from it. Yeah. So whereas mine was like a passion project, like it was something that I just didn't like. I didn't like how exclusive the industry was, how grateful people from particular backgrounds were expected to be when they got in, how much you had to change yourself to fit into those working environments. Like all of that really bothered me. How inaccessible it was for particular people. Like I grew up on a council estate. Had I not gone to college and like badgered my careers advisor, who's amazing and who I'm still friends with, I don't even know what I'd have like ended up doing. And that's someone that's like academic and wanted to learn. So I didn't know what to do. So can you imagine if someone's disengaged, like how they would be motivated or even given any insight into like various career options and stuff. So it just bothered me. So I didn't really even start earning money. Considering I set it up in 2008, I didn't earn any money from it until 2015. And I didn't, but I may have started charging. I remember the first time I charged would have been 2013, but that we charged a client. But then I used that to fund another training project. So what I didn't do, I never had any funding.
Wow.
I used my career, I used my journalism salary to fund that business. So it wasn't until, quite literally 2015, 16 that I earned money from what I was doing. So I don't know if I'd call it a hustle just yet, a side hustle just yet.
But you're okay now, it's paid off.
It's paid off now, yeah.
Well, the reason why I asked your age is because do you think that maybe discovering your purpose early or what you wanted to do early helped you to achieve the level of success that you have today? Or do you think if you had started at any time, it wouldn't have really mattered as long as you were passionate about it?
So what I would say is, I think for me, I had, from a very young age, I had quite extremely high levels of ambition.
Wow.
And I had extremely unrealistic deadlines as to when these ambitions needed to be realized. So I think for me, it was important I started when I did, because I wanted everything now. So I was prepared to, but not because, I didn't want everything now and I weren't prepared to work for it. I worked non-stop. I worked more than I saw friends. I worked more than I did anything. Wow. And I'm not suggesting people should do that, because it wasn't healthy in any manner, but it just certainly was the route that I took. But what I would say is that there are people I've known over the years who have found that their rhythm with a particular passion point much later, and have still had the same level of kind of impact, if not more, and also might be doing like financially very well and mentally really well. So what I would say is that for me, I think it was the journey I have had is the one I kind of just have to accept was mine. But if I was giving advice to somebody else, I would say there's no, like, it's never too late to start. Like you can start at any point. And whether that is 50, 10, 7, 35, I don't think it makes a difference as long as you're like committed to yourself doing it.
Yeah, because I think that there's a lot of pressures on young people now to be this super entrepreneur, and sometimes at the detriment of, thinking about their well-being or, themselves. So I think it's good to just hear that, knowing yourself and knowing when you're ready to do something is probably the most important. So with going back to the work that you're currently doing, what is it you love most about your work now?
You know what? I like the consultancy the most. So we have three services. One is diversity data and metrics, and another which is basically measuring the work you're doing around diversity and inclusion within an organization and your people data. And then we have executive search, which is essentially finding your non-exec directors, your trustees, your CEOs, your senior leaders. And then we have the consultancy piece, which is focused on changing the culture of your workplace. So like making sure that it's a place that people want to come to and work, and that, irrespective of whether they're a female, an ethnic minority, a young person, someone with dyspraxia, someone with a criminal conviction, that they're going to have a nice time at work, they're going to feel good about work. So when we go in and do that work, that's really fulfilling, because that consists of things like focus groups, inclusion workshops, book clubs that get us talking about tricky subjects like white privilege, extremist views, the way that we may speak to those individuals who are like wheelchair users or have any other visible physical disability. And then again, things like dyspraxia, dyscalculia, how those things impact us. So I think I find that bit the most valuable, because it's people centric. I speak to different people all day long. They tell me how they're feeling about work. I use what they tell me to confidentially feedback to businesses so that they can know how to be better, to make their environment one which will be more inclusive. And then also I come up with programs that then change the way that company behaves. And so I think there are many huge like structural and systemic challenges in society, and I could talk about it on blogs, I could have an Instagram story about it, or I could go into the places where it needs to change and I could just fix it all. And I've always been that way. Like, I don't complain, I fix. Like, I'm very solution focused.
Yeah, that's
what I like.
That's fantastic. I think even myself and Alessa, we had a conversation about diversity and inclusion even before this webinar. And I know that she's super passionate about things like that too.
Yeah, I could see Alessia nodding along.
Yeah, no, I just share everything you say. Like, I think it's incredible the work you're doing, and definitely it's. I work in government, and I'm also trying to push for equality and diversity data, especially that we are missing. So yeah,
it's so important, that data.
Very important. Yeah.
This is a good link.
So, yeah. It is.
What is one of the most rewarding projects that you've worked on? Because obviously you've touched on some of the core strands that your company. So is there anything that you thought, wow, this is taking my breath away almost?
Yeah, I can probably do that in phases. So like when I was 18 to sort of 22, we used to run mentoring programs, and that saw about 150 people placed into work. And I couldn't believe that little old me, who was 20, 21 at that time, still studying, still trying to do a dissertation, still running to work experience from Reading University, coming back on the trains into London to do that. I couldn't believe that, just with having an idea and seeing the disconnect between the amount of people out there with a journalism qualification or an interest in that industry, not linked to the industry. And so when I finally sort of came up with that solution, I know I'm going to create a formalized mentoring program, which included activities and things that would lead to kind of employment. Meant that, and when I saw how many people we were able to put into work, I was pretty impressed by that impact. Not by me, I was so impressed by the people. I was very happy that I knew there was talent out there that were excellent, that were from these different backgrounds, and I knew that these companies weren't looking in the right places. I just knew, and I knew they weren't engaging. So when I was able to find them and go, see, and then those people owned their success and smashed it, I felt that's what I'm saying, that's what I'm saying. If you give someone a minute,
Yeah.
and like allow them to be themselves, actually we do see some excellence. Like, and I don't know that we're ever, sometimes I think our color walks in or our gender walks in before we even get to do anything. And so all these like assumptions are made about us, or you know, where we grew up or whatever walks in before us, and then everyone kind of expects us to behave in a particular way, or they think that excellent only looks a particular way. So I was just so happy with that. And then my master's course was like £9,000, and I had to get not only a bank loan but also a bursary to pay for it.
Wow.
And because I'd like just wasn't from a home where we had that money. So what I did when I was doing the course was I took the curriculum, and I spoke to the accreditation body that accredited our course, and I created essentially the curriculum with the accreditation, and then I gave the training away for free. So I used my my salary from the BBC to pay for a space at the Camden Roundhouse, and then I used charities and organisations that helped young people at that time from different backgrounds, you know, whether they had a disability, whether they were not yet, you know, able to get engaged in something, if it was a youth club, a church, whatever it may have been. And I got them to, you know, share my training with the young people, and they all started to apply. And then I put them on the course, which was run then by a lot of people that had given me work experience, so who were professional enough, because I was only 21 at this time, I hadn't even graduated myself, to run the course. And so as a result, like we found 75 people work. I mean, one of them even went on to be like an editor quite quickly. After that happened, some went abroad. It was incredible. And I was only like 21, 22. So even as I say that aloud, I can't believe we managed to do that. We had no money, like literally no money. I was paying off that roundhouse in installments on my salary, and my first salary was like 19,000 a year. Can you imagine trying to kind of survive on that? Even now, like much less. So thank God I was at home, you know what I mean? And so then using that little bit that I did have to put into that, I'm like really pleased that we did that. And then I think a bit more later on, probably like in 2015, when we got like our impact report back and they told us how many people had been helped through our work, and it was in the 3,000 range, I was thinking like, yeah, like that was a moment of bloody hell, like I haven't slept much, like my friends have gone on holidays, I haven't, like, you know what I mean, there's all those sacrifices I made, people started to buy houses I hadn't. So like I felt like, well, that's something though, I have done something. It's not like that time's gone without anything. And then I think a bit later, it's been like going into a Magic Circle law firm or a huge trading organization or a big construction firm, like doing focus groups, coming out and saying, this is how your people feel, this is what I say we implement to change that, being allowed to implement it, and then seeing those people a lot happier. I think that's this phase is, wow, we did that kind of moment. So there's been a few at different stages.
Brilliant. Wow. You seem very, you know, your drive, passion. I'm surprised we haven't worked with you because all of our live event time. I'm you know, but you're somebody that we've known of for a very long time. But, you know, your drive and passion is just, you know, for those, the attendees who are listening, I'm sure there's a lot that they can gather. We're still on question, on question 5, I think. And there's so many nuggets already. And for those who are in the chat box, please feel free to ask questions. I'm sure there's so many nuggets that Joanna's already dropped, and then Alessia will definitely, you know, get that across to us. So we spoke about what your most rewarding projects was. We spoke about, you know, getting 3,000 people in. You know, that's a massive milestone at such a young age. So it's kind of, the next question is kind of similar, but not the same in the sense that, what would you say was your breakthrough moment? You know, that could probably be in the organization that you're in now, or maybe an award, or, you know, what was that moment, that defining moment where you said, wow, yes, this is it, you know? I mean, it never maybe is, this is it, because it's a journey, but, you know, there's always that thing that is like the big break.
I think there was a moment in 2019, when I realized that I only needed myself. So what I mean by that is I don't mean that I didn't need a team and that it was all about me. What I mean is that the business had been so like sort of in the background, I trialed partnerships with another big exec search firm that I didn't think were the right fit eventually. I then later on launched a brand for a FTSE 250 company, which I absolutely loved, and I'm still very close to that company. And then later on, I got some private investment, and I realized actually that throughout all of that, like in 2019, I thought, just believe in yourself. Don't feel like, because it had always felt like this little project, this passion project of mine, I always assumed I needed someone that knew a bit more than me or who looked a particular way. And I didn't trust my own like instincts, experience, expertise, and just knowledge. And I'd suddenly go to things and realize that people were just listening to me. So I do know what I'm doing, and like that gave me a bit more confidence. Whereas I used to think that I needed like that CEO to tell me because they're a CEO, or you know what I mean, or that investor because they're rich, therefore they know better. Like, I don't know why I had this assumption all the time that there was someone that knew a bit more than me. So I'd naively go into situations, not really knowing the value of like what I brought to the table. And so I think that breakthrough moment came then when suddenly I was thinking, actually, the clients are dealing with me and the team, not you know, not these kind of external forces. The knowledge building is you and your team. They're reading, you're reading. They're spending the time getting to know these groups and understand their differences. Actually, so do you need all of this other kind of cosign from everybody else, or do you and your team just need to keep believing in yourselves and keep going? And so in the last sort of 18 months, that has happened, and we've been fine, if that makes sense. Like the last sort of 18 to 24 months, as when we've done things, I wouldn't say for the first time, because Shine Media was entirely myself and a team from 2008 to 2016. But then after that, as I say, we've done a few little partnerships and we wanted to take things to the next level. And so this is the first time, let's say, in like the 4 years that for this last 2 that we've been just alone. And I think that was a breakthrough of me realizing I didn't really need all these other cooks in the kitchen necessarily.
Yeah, precisely. And so what would you say is one of the biggest challenges that you faced so far?
Do you know what? This is the most, like, I'm going to be really honest about this challenge. Do you know what it is? It's the way people treat you. I find that has been the biggest challenge. I think there's something about being a woman, which I never used to think, like, I never used to think being a woman would be a problem, but I can see in the way people speak to me, like, you know, being given like the awards I've been given, and like some of the like the MBE that you can put on the end of your name, and the doctor that you can put, and all of that stuff. Like, even with that, which you'd think would say to an external person, this person has earned their stripes, they know what they're talking about. Even then, they still speak to you like a silly little girl. Or like, and it's not just men, women do it too as well. So sometimes I find that the most challenging. Like, it's not an ego thing. It's a like, I can see that it's not an ego thing on my point. It is a entitlement feeling that I get from them. This privilege, this level of entitlement that I just know sometimes I just know if I didn't look like this, if my skin wasn't this color, if my gender wasn't this, they just would not speak to me in the same way. They would not handle me in the same way. And so it's not, I'm not sitting here kind of feeling self-conscious and vulnerable or egotistical. I can just see the difference, even at board meetings. Like, you see the difference between like the way someone would treat you over somebody else. I think that's the bit I find so challenging, because I'm really fed up of and very tired of this concept of like what successful looks like. And like the fact that, you know, yeah, it's just this idea that, you know, their idea of success is one way. And that usually is like going through the corporate route. Does that make sense? Or like, unless you've got this corporate sexy brand behind you or millions of pounds, you're not, I don't know, there's something about the way people can treat you. And that's all, I've always found that quite a struggle with everything I do. So if there's anything, it's people feeling that they're better than, or their idea of success and the profile that they attach to that is the only one. And so they make others who don't fit the mainstream image of that in their mind feel inadequate. I think that's my biggest challenge. I hope that even answers it. Does that answer?
That makes sense. It does make sense. So how would you say your field has changed in the last 5 years?
The optimist in me wants to say that we're getting better, that society is caring more and companies are doing more. So, and there is evidence to suggest that. However, I also run the all-party parliamentary group for diversity with my colleague Alex and Dave, and we're doing a big report at the moment, and that just proves that we've still got a very, very long way to go. And that a lot of people have been talking, and certainly before the second sort of increased profile of Black Lives Matter that we saw last year, there definitely wasn't the same level of commitment. And then suddenly the George Floyd incident and Breonna Taylor incidents happened, and BLM picked up steam, and then companies became so interested in this topic again, which is good. If good can come from those tragedies, then and change can come, then I'm sure that's a positive thing. But it's a shame that it took that for it to happen. It's a shame that the only reason it got probably noticed in the way that it should have been for years and years is because COVID forced us to all be at home, and suddenly humbled everyone to realize that you know, things are happening around the world that do impact you, and you can positively change it. So what I would say is that we've still had a lot of slow progress. You know, I'm by no means a pioneer in this. There's people that will sit on my board and have sat on my board in the past who have been fighting this fight 20 years before me. So we're making slow progress, but we are making progress. And what I would say is that as a result of BLM, we've seen a bit more activity from companies who are happy to put their money where their mouth is, which in previous times I don't think they've been so committed to.
Brilliant. That's a very good analysis. Because obviously, if you work in sort of diversity and inclusion space, then I mean, again, myself and I left NSC, we spoke about, you know, Black Lives Matter, we spoke about George Floyd, we spoke about a lot of things before this webinar, not knowing that it's all becoming full circle now. It kind of feels like, was you listening to our conversation? Like literally like having a full-on discussion. So it's quite interesting that it's so refreshing to see that this is actually being discussed, not just amongst, you know, the BME community, but the wider communities as well. And they have an interest to also help break some of those barriers, which I think is really important as well. Because, exactly. So how has COVID-19 impacted your work?
If I'm completely honest, like when we were first hit by COVID, back in March of 2020, everything kind of slowed down. So it didn't come to an abrupt stop, but it did slow down. So I mean, I continued to be quite busy, but in terms of like work, we and projects that we had on, they probably slowed down until April, May, and then in June, July, August, it all picked up again. And it hasn't stopped. I've been on it, like I've been like a race dog when they come out the tracks and they've just been running like so fast, like I'm still running, like it hasn't slowed down yet. I haven't reached like the finish line yet. So I'm not going to complain though, because of course this has been a horrible time for a lot of people. A lot of people have lost jobs, and so if I'm able to keep working and hopefully making things a bit better, I'll do that.
Brilliant. And again, if anyone has any questions for Joanna, we're sort of coming to the last few questions. Please feel free to use the chat box, and Alessia will respond to you. So on to the next question. What's the best advice that you've received?
There's a couple. So the first is, if you focus on your weaknesses, you become strong. And if you focus on your strengths, you become unique. And so I've always tried to focus on my strengths, because then I know what it is specifically about me that I'm bringing to any conversation. And any scenario. And it also helps me identify what's not for me. what's not the right thing for me and where my skills possibly don't lie, and allows me to move out of the way and let someone with those skills, especially from a broad background, like from a more broader background, come in and take that seat at that table. The other piece of advice I was given, which actually by Karen Blackett, was you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so use them in that proportion. So listen more than you speak, which I think is really useful. And it's really helped me on my journey as a D&I, EDI expert, because in listening is how you understand what's going on and why things are the way they are and what people need in order to feel a bit more valued and a sense of belonging. So it certainly helped me and put me in good stead. I would also say one last piece of advice that I've always think is important is be kind. I think in business, people think you have to be ruthless. You don't, like, you just don't. That you really don't. Like, I can't think of one scenario where it's been necessary. So I think stick up for yourself, because you will get a couple of ruthless people swimming around at times. So know your value and your worth, and know how to stand up for yourself without losing, yourself or your class or whatever it is. But I also think, like, kill them with kindness at the same time. Like, being kind is so important. And even if you're the best person at a job, people have still got to work with you. So if you're just not nice, like, whether you can do an amazing job or not, they'll find someone that can do maybe a less amazing job, but they like them. Like, they're going to be positive. No one wants a headache. No one wants stress. We're in a really tough time. Even pre-COVID, people were having tough times, So if they could work with someone and get along, I'm not saying like be best friends, but just get along, they'd much prefer that person over the not very kind one, but really good at X, for example. So just always be kind as well. You never know what people are dealing with.
That's true. I agree with that piece of advice. So, what motivates you then? What motivates you every day?
That's a really good question. Every day, what motivates me? I don't know. I feel like when it comes to the people, I speak to so many, I hear so many things, so they kind of motivate me, because I feel like when I hear some of their experiences, it still angers me. So I know that there's still more to do. So I feel like, why have you stopped? I also, like, there's just personal things that I want to have achieved with the business, but also personally in myself. And so sometimes there's things like that I think keep going, because that's where you are now felt like it was not possible. So where you want to get to should feel like it's possible if you've been able to get here. So I think that. I also think I struggle quite a lot at times. I've struggled in the past a lot, and still currently, with anxiety and depression. And so my work has actually helped me to remember my sense of, like, purpose, because when you're very down, you can forget the value that you bring to anything. You can forget the value that you add to your family, to your friends, to your workplace, whatever. And especially because I work for myself and I've got the team, but that's always helped me to center me back to a point of, well, you need to get up and try tomorrow, because so and so is waiting on it, that client's expecting it, this group of people are hoping to share their views with you and be heard. So it's helped me in that way work has actually in some instances kind of saved my life at times, because it's reminded me that there are other people who I'm responsible for and who require my fight in order to kind of keep going. So I think they're probably the different things that motivate me, really.
Wow, you touched on a lot of things there, very candid and very open and honest. I think a lot of people sometimes in the business world are not so open about, personal things that they go through, but I think you touched on some really powerful things. So who would you say is your greatest influence?
I think, if I'm, like, honest, growing up, my brother was a former Great Britain sprinter, and then he went on to run for Ghana, because we're from Ghana and England, and he he was just, I find it so funny when I look back on it. He was like a teenager. We lived in a council estate in South West London, and obviously we didn't have that much money, but he like changed his diet to make sure he was a good athlete. So if you can imagine, like when you're in one of those kind of low income homes, it's like it's either fufu and soup, or it might be like oven chips and something quick, you know, things that like your mum and dad can whip up real quick that aren't too expensive. And so I think, I just remember thinking like for him to go and find a little job so that he could buy like fresh veg all the time and eat properly, and then making sure he went to sleep, and he trained every day, like no matter what. So I think having an older brother that was like so committed, and then he'd go off and come back with a medal around his neck, or like it was really good. So it kind of showed you that like there was another way, like you could get an interest and you could use what you had. So I'd say he didn't have an easy time growing up at all. He had a tough time. So I think that was also a bit of a kind of like influence on me, was like he never had any excuses. Just there was no laziness in him whatsoever. Like it's just not a word you associate with him. And then I think my mum and dad were like adamant that I be educated, like adamant. Like we might not have like enough money for like the best trainers and like the best clothes, but you're never going to leave here like kind of uneducated. So I'd say like them, my mum and dad in that respect for like education, my brother I think for like discipline, sacrifice, commitment, and my sister for like, she's a bit of a protector. So she's like a primary school teacher now, and she's like, and I'm the youngest of the three of us, and she's like a protector. She's warm, she's generous. And so I think all of those things combined probably shaped. My mum's very warm, and so that like I think like shaped me. And my dad's very, have you read your books? Have you read? Why aren't you reading? So I think all of those things like have probably shaped to like have probably been the greatest influence, because they're your first influences, aren't they, really? The people that you're born around and raised around.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Such a great story. I love the way that you really give us, you know, the full course of your story.
Sorry, I talk too much. Sorry.
No, you don't. I think I'm really glad because, like I said, you know, individuals could choose to skim, but you'd rather sort of give us everything, and so that we can really. And there's a lot of stuff that I can relate to in your story as well in terms of growing up. So that's why I'm just like I'm really happy that, you know, we're getting the full in-depth stories, so that those that really need the motivation and inspiration, and those who replay this and watch it, can really feel like they can sort of connect and learn and feel inspired. So again, we're just wrapping up to the last question. I see some questions in the chat box. If anyone has any question they want to ask, please feel free to ask. Please use the chat box to ask away now. So what is your vision, and what would the world look like, you know, once you've completely realized your full and total vision for your life?
That's a powerful question. It's a big question. That is a serious...
all of these questions.
I think, what would the world look like? I think I don't know. That's a heavy one. But what I think in terms of like what I hope people feel when they've disengaged with Blue Moon is, and that's hopefully then like the world, is like I just want it to be fair. And I know that sounds like a bit like fluffy, but I really want it to be fair. I just don't understand why things are how they are. Like, and if I start talking about it, I'll start ranting, but it like really bothers me that like if you are a wheelchair user, for example, like you feel disabled by your environment because the environment's not set up for you. Like why is that? Why is like the majority, the able-bodied, like the priority? Why isn't just everyone the priority? Does that make sense? Like, why is there a particular race that we see as the privileged race, and then the others that we consider like the minority groups, and the like, why is that? Why are we in a world where that's going on? And I know all the answers to those questions largely because you can read books, history books, and you can understand it, but I don't agree with it. So when I'm saying why, I'm like, whatever have been my answers, I'm not satisfied with. So I'm just trying to work out, like, why do we live in a world where people feel that particular groups have a priority over others? And it's so sad, right? Because of course historically it's been intentional, but now it's not. People aren't even aware they do it. That's how ingrained it is into people's behavior. That, like, if you think about microaggressions, like, people are so, like, in their own bubble about their experiences that they're not even aware half the time that they're making other people feel like that. And that's certainly something that I find with the work I do, that, you know, people are like, I'll give you an example. Sometimes I'll say to a client, you know, have you thought about diversifying where you look for your talent so that you do get a broader range of people who are a bit more representative of everyone that could do that job? And their reply will be, I'm not just going to give someone a job because they're black. I'm not just going to give someone a job because they're white. I mean, a woman. Or I'm just going to give someone a job because, and I'm like, I didn't ask that. That wasn't the question that I just asked you. And so, like, that's what I mean by, like, there's this level of like entitlement that if I ask you to diversify out your workforce, I've got to explain why that should happen. But why the hell shouldn't it happen? Like, why have I got to explain to you that there's other people with talent that don't look like you? Why is that even something I've got to explain? I think that's what I mean by, like, and the assumption that I'm talking about race because you're looking at me as a mixed race black girl, and so therefore that can be my only concern. I just find all of that stuff, like, because no one's gone, why have you got a job? Like, you know, no one does that, right? So I don't understand why when it's required that you think about the people you exclude, all of a sudden it comes down to a case of they might not be good though. So you mean everyone in here is absolutely excellent? Like, and the only excellent people look like this kind of thing. Do you know what I mean? And I find that it's just not true, is it? I know it's not true because I know excellent people that are from all walks of life. So I just know that's not true. So I think that what I'd like to see is people stop having this level of, like, entitlement that they get to choose whether or not someone gets to fulfill their potential based on the biases and views that they have on them, like that. That I'm not comfortable with.
Biases. Wow, this is really powerful.
Sorry.
There's so many things that I do that just ties in so much with some of the stuff that you do, because I've just, it's so refreshing to hear someone so passionate about equality and diversity. It's amazing. And I think
sorry, we got the fur baby. Say hello.
Behind you. Is that a person crawling to not be seen, or is that an animal?
No, this is my little friend who gets involved in absolutely everything.
I don't know if you saw the Zoom chat this week with the faux pas with the meow cat and the lawyer. That was interesting. So we're just wrapping up now. Anybody again has any questions, you can feel free to ask. Or I've just got two things. They're just completely unscripted. So if you could just tell people how they can get through to you, where they can sort of find you and.
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter and Instagram with my first name and my last name. My last name is spelled Abeyie, just to be clear, and Joanna's just, okay, maybe it's not actually Joanna, just in case there's others that spell it with the H. Yeah, so I'm on all of those platforms. And if you wanted to check out the website, it's just www.createbluemoon.com. And the reason we're called Blue Moon, because I get asked that quite a lot.
Ask that question.
Yeah. So the reason we're called Blue Moon is because, you know, there's that saying that is like, oh, once in a blue moon. That happens once in a blue moon. We wanted to play on that because actually we were kind of fed up of, like, well, we wanted to play on that. I had a really great branding company called Macklemore who did it for me, did the work on getting to know me and the business. And essentially Blue Moon was about, our strapline is not as rare as you think. So the point was that, like, talent and diverse talent isn't this rare thing that you barely can find and it's so hard to find them. We're saying, no, we can create a blue moon. And also what Natalie, who works in the Macklemore team, told me was that blue moons happen all the time that we don't actually know about. So that saying, once in a blue moon, is actually quite an inaccurate saying because they happen all the time.
Wow, that's so powerful.
That's why we chose it. That's why we chose it.
Alessia, is there anything you want to sort of ask Joanna?
Yeah, no, we don't have any questions, but I had 2 questions if we have time.
Mhm.
If that's okay. So the first one is really about you've talked like you are so full of energy and just passionate, and you seem just going and going against any adversity, and no one can stop you. But like, where are you finding your resilience, and sort of what do you do when you feel like your energy is going down, and if it goes down, what are your sort of strategies to sort of find the moment for yourself and to sort of recharge? And the second one is how do you've mentioned that you have some clients who ask you those questions, and sometimes when there are people who are open-minded, it's easy for them, it's easy to talk and explain your point of view. But when you have people who are not open-minded, and it's like talking through a wall, what are your strategies to sort of like get into some sort of get them to understand your point of view, and get into a sort of like agreement and middle way? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really good question, actually, and I don't think I'm asked that enough, because that's I spend a lot of time doing that. that second one, I say the first one, I read all the time. So I know what I like. Like, I'm 34 next month. I don't know if there's something that comes with like, because that's not very old. I'm not saying that because when I say that, all my friends that are in their 40s and 50s are like, what are you talking about? You're a child. But I don't know if there's something that comes with like getting a bit older where you're just like, I know what I want to do and I know what I like, so I'm not going to do other things anymore. So like, I read books. I'm obsessed with crime. Like everything you can imagine on Netflix that is about crime. Unfortunately, killers. I don't like anything like child abuse or rape, or I can't do any of that stuff. I'm an empath, so I won't sleep for days. But things like, behind the minds of a serial killer, or that kind of like investigative bit, I like that. I don't want to sit and speak to one. I just want to like working out the psychology and stuff. I love like reading novels. I horse ride. So when it gets too much, I always horse ride. I jog. Like I've jogged every day this week because I've felt like a bit meh, like this is a bit monotonous. So they're the kind of things that I do. But I also do like, I always have I try to manifest things. So I have a vision board. I have a gratitude journal that I write in without fail. I pray every night. I read a prayer every night. So there's lots of things that I try to do to center myself again. And I speak to a counselor. I speak to a counselor like at least twice a week in the evenings. So like, don't think that I'm just this energized powerhousey like bunny, like energizer bunny that just like keeps going. I cry a lot. And if it weren't for my counselor, I probably like would like lose the will to live sometimes, because the conversations I'm having are really heavy, as you can imagine, like with clients. So then in terms of how do I convince them? Well, the first tip I would say is stop making the white male feel like the demon in the agenda. I think when we do that, we disengage them, and actually we need them to be allies. And also, it's not fair. I don't think like inclusion is like starting to exclude other groups. I think it's about finding a way that everyone can be included. And I feel like sometimes, I've worked on, or I've sat on a panel with a white male who people have assumed is like super duper privileged, and they're not. Like some of them may have like left school at like 15, gone and worked in the post room and just worked their backsides off. And I'm not saying they haven't had privilege of being a white male, what comes with that from the worldview, but like it's hard for them to maybe hear that that's the only reason why they got where they got to, if they feel that they've really worked hard. You know what I mean? So sometimes and you don't know the backstory. That could be a kid out of care. That could be so I just think being really mindful sometimes about when we use the language, that we're not kind of removing any of their experiences as a valuable one, or one that we need to consider. I think making sure that you define diversity, inclusion, equity, and equality. So what do they mean? Because I think some firms still think diversity means gender. So how many women have we got on the board? Or you've got people like, like saying, oh, you know, diversity is about having BAME people, which isn't even a term anyone likes, but, you know, having BAME people on a board. So I think it's about actually establishing what those terms mean, because once you realize that diversity is difference and inclusion means including the difference, is that could be about anyone, you know, from any background. So it's not race, it's not class, it's not, it's like all things. And also remembering intersectionality. So you could be a white male, but you could be a trans white male, you could be a Black woman who is a Black Muslim with a disability, you know, you could be, there's so, like, we're not all one thing, you know, we're all lots of things. So I think when you start introducing that, then people start to realize that you're actually trying to support them and their motivations as much as everybody else, and then it feels more like a level playing field as opposed to us and them. And whatever I say here, I'm going to get into trouble for, and I need to be kind of like on the defense rather than, like, you know, laid back and open to the fact that other people's experiences are valuable, and it doesn't make me a bad person that I maybe don't know them. I think what I always say is, it's okay if you don't know now, but once you do know better, you should always do better. And I think once I've kind of said that, they're a bit like, okay, so the expectation comes when I've had the education, as opposed to right now in this moment when I still feel quite vulnerable.
Yeah. There's just a question from Joy. She said, I work as a service manager, and when shortlisting people for vacancies, I feel that a lot of people don't have the general skills / information on how to apply for jobs. When mentoring people or speaking to companies, do you see this gap a lot? And what usually is your advice for companies or candidates?
Yeah, so I always recommend that candidates either engage with us or other organisations that specifically will help them with, you know, having a great CV, knowing how to write a cover letter, but also how to explain so it's not just the format of a cover letter, it's about explaining what skills you have and how they how you talk about them in an interview. Because I think Joy makes a really good point there, that sometimes people do actually have all the skills, but they're not used to knowing how to talk about their skills. So then it's a bit like, it just becomes a bit of a problem. And so I would say, like, I think it's quite important that we do that, and that we give candidates an opportunity to go to workshops to work out how to articulate clearly and concisely in a letter what it is that they can bring to a role. One of the things I would say is that companies, though, could make more of an effort to do that. Because, for example, you will know your recruitment process, you know what that looks like. So, and you'll also know from data and from patterns and from, like, you're looking at your workforce, who's successful at getting through your processes. So I think it's also quite important that companies go, you know, there's a certain type of candidate that doesn't quite get through. So we might get a CV and a cover letter which is successful, for example, but when we interview them, they're not able to back up what they've said. And I think it's actually really important to then say to that person who, you know, didn't quite deliver what was on that piece of paper in an interview, to come and have some, like, interview training with you, run a pre-application workshop, you know, that talks to people about how they can get some of these things right. Yeah. And I know we want a competitive workforce, but there are just genuinely some people who start the race at a different place. And it's important that we remember that and try to bridge the gap so that they can compete fairly. Because at the moment, I don't think we've established that. So my advice would be to companies is to start engaging. We always have a not yet policy. So we never say no, we say not yet. And we tell people what it is that they can do to be ready for the next opportunity that we will then go and find for them. So I think companies could be doing exactly that, looking at their employment patterns and working out where there are gaps, and then saying, okay, so for those individuals that we know fall short here, here's some activities that we're going to run to make sure that you're not falling short anymore. And they're not hard things to do. We can do them like how we're running this now. You can do them online, you can do coffee drop-ins, you know, you can have webinars where you just go through demonstrations. Like, there is so much that companies could be doing, saying, you want to be successful at applying for a job, here's some of our pointers. You could even do that on LinkedIn in a blog.
Yeah, I think even with our recruitment process, because we do a lot of recruitment for a lot of the projects that we do, a lot of people put their LinkedIn now, which is something that years ago wasn't something that, but it's like, yeah, you know, LinkedIn. So that's brilliant. Yeah, Joy said, thank you. I really appreciate your advice. Brilliant.
Just sent a little note back.
So actually rounding up, I think we're kind of more or less like bang on time, which is quite incredible, considering. So yeah, thank you so much for.
Thank you.
I'm not too tired. I know.
I had COVID, and one of the things of COVID, as you get better, is fatigue.
Wow.
I've still got fatigue.
Wow.
So yeah, like have I high energy for a meeting, and then I'm like.
In the evening. Thank you so much, Joanna. This was absolutely amazing.
Thanks.
Amazing. I think there's so many gems that people have taken away. Okay, we're just going to take one last question. Do you want to ask that question, Alessia? This is the last question, then we're going, everybody.
Yeah, so it's from Stella. I'm 32. I would like to progress into a managerial financial controller role, but I don't think the company is taking me seriously enough. I've asked to placed on programs for additional training, which I know others have been granted, but I have always seemed to be put on the back burner, or they're giving me excuses. How can I push for more so I can progress in my career?
So those sorts of things happen quite a lot, and I'm really sorry that's happening to you, Stella, because it's not nice. A couple of things I'd probably suggest is every time you ask for something, I'd write it down on an email. I'd always email that conversation. I wouldn't like go over to someone. If you've done that, can you just write back whether you've done it in the chat, just because that will also help me with my next piece of advice. But yeah, I would always ask for those requests of training and learning and development on email. Yeah, see, face to face. So make sure it's on an email chain, because what you want to be able to do is eventually, if it really starts to become, because you say they put you on the back burner, if you're finding that actually you're still on the back burner, you can go to someone, whether it's within HR, and say, look, I've asked countless times for learning and development opportunities and they don't arise. And you could also take it to, if you have in your organization, like your diversity and inclusion lead, who would then be a sponsor for you, because they've got a chain that, so they'll see what you've asked for and they'll see the response, and they'll be able to manage the expectations of yourself, but also have necessary conversations with your leaders. Also, it may be the person you're asking doesn't actually have the power to give you what you want. So for example, if you wanted to have a little bit more training, you said, there's a couple of things I would do. I would look up programs outside of the office, outside of the business, and I would find out the costs, and I would ask HR if there's a way in which they could pay for some of those, because you think it's a learning and development opportunity. And if they say speak to your manager, I would still CC HR in when I've asked the manager that question. Another thing I would do also is I would, you said that you wanted to go into a financial controller role. I would either seek the financial controller within your own organization or one outside of it, and I would ask them to mentor you. So I would ask them, what is it that they do in their day-to-day role now that you need to know to do? And so I'd take them through what I do currently, like really, really detailed what I do in my role currently. And then I would ask them to tell me what their role requires, what they do. I'd take some days off work and go and shadow them if they'd let me. And I know because of COVID, that's a bit difficult, but maybe even if you're able to join some webinar, Zoom meetings that they're happy for you to join in, so you can actually see what they do. And then in my own time, I would gradually build the skills that I need to be a financial controller. And then when that job becomes available within my particular workplace, I would apply, but I would just start applying for financial controller roles. So what I would do is if I've got the skills that are missing and I've been building them up, I'd start to put myself out there as someone who is capable of doing a financial controller role. What I wouldn't do is allow that person who keeps trying to put you on the back burner to get to control whether or not you get to progress to that point. And another piece of advice I'd give you is go and talk to if you have one in your organization, the learning and development team, and say, what programs are there? And they might come back with that kind of bureaucratic response, which is your manager has to refer you, or you need to speak to your manager. And again, say, well, I will, but I've been asking for it and I don't get anywhere. And this is something that's really important to me and my learning. And I think as long as you're CCing in everyone, so HR, L&D and your manager, then you should start to get some clear answers on why you're not being able to get these things. So I'd do two things. I'd keep holding the business to account, but then I wouldn't let them stand in my way. I'd go out and find what I need, and I'd upskill myself. And if it came to some courses, there are bursaries out there. It's another thing to look at. If your company then go, we're not going to pay for that, there are bursaries out there that specifically help people who want to upskill themselves, who haven't been given that opportunity via their own internal business.
So it seems like, oh, wow, there's a lot of proactiveness.
No, don't worry about being a target or labeled, because do you have a D&I group in your organization? Because one of the things that comes up in our sessions all the time is I say that no one feels that they can talk, because then they're going to become like the troublemaker, or you know, the target that you of all these negative conversations. So that's why I say, if you've got someone in D&I that or a network that you can be a bit of an ally for, who's gotten into your senior leadership team, I would. Another thing you could do is lots of CEOs were looking to be reverse mentored, which is that they are mentored by somebody more junior in their business about a number of things. So sometimes it's been on race, sometimes it's just been on culture, sometimes it's just been understanding what the experiences are of the younger generation who are starting out in their careers now. If I were you, I'd ask like the CEO or the CFO if they're happy to be reverse mentored. And it looks like you're reporting directly into your financial controller. So I would see if the CEO would like that. And then once you've gone into the CEO, you can start being honest about the fact that there are things going on in the business, in the organization, which won't come across as confrontational, but instead would come across as you trying to be an ally for them. And that would give you an opportunity to talk to them about the fact that there are these things going on, of which you're experiencing, but you're sure others also experience, that don't come to light because they don't want to cause trouble and they don't want to involve HR. But HR are your human resource. So it's not a telltale system. It is I would like some things. Are you able to help me? And you can even say, I've been advised that HR are the best place for me to make this request. So it doesn't sound like you're going above anyone. It just sounds like you're doing as you're told and the advice you've been given.
Wow, this is fantastic. You would have to do some form of workshop or something.
Yeah.
Do some kind of workshop or something, because it seems to me, which I didn't realize, that there was possibly a diversity and inclusion issue in terms of employees themselves. I always thought it was companies that just hired individuals like yourself out to help them with their diversity issue, but it sounds like possibly the women in our network, the young women in our network, actually have some diversity and inclusion issues that they're facing and don't know how
to. It's not just that, it's actually the lot of the problem, which is why I was saying it's the culture piece that I find interesting. A lot of it is the internal. It's like what's going on in the business. So I'd have to look yours up, and so what I'll do is I'll if you contact me on social media, I'll look it up and then I'll send it to you, because the one I used for me was specific to my industry, so I'd have to look up which ones are specific to yours.
Great. So I'll leave Stella to contact you on social media, but if anyone has any further questions, you can email info@youngladies.com. We'll forward it on. Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. We're going to stop the recording now. Thank you, Joanna. Thank you, Alessia. This was fantastic. I'm sure we can go on forever and ever and ever, but so thank you so much for joining. And yes, we definitely hope to work with you again. This was very informative, very insightful, and it was definitely huge, pearls of wisdom for all those who listen and who will listen after. So thank you very much.
No, thank you. I've got to go to the PT now. I took some screenshots. Did you want me to send them or post them or what?
Yeah, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Unless you want to post the one now.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah. At least this one I know that you'll like, right? And then I can just post it.
Okay.